Welcome to From X to Z, the show that believes you never age out of learning about the world around you. Featuring social media maven Danielle, Farage, and Mervyn and Dinnen, the analyst who puts the X in expert. They're here to talk all things jobs, HR, and trends. So mind the generational gap. This is From X to Z, only on the Purple Acorn Network.
Hello. Welcome back to From X to Z. I'm Danielle Farage, co-host of the show, your favorite Gen Z expert, and I'm here with Mervyn Dinnen. How's it going, Mervyn?
It's going good. Am I the favorite Gen X expert? That's what I need to know.
It's self-declared, so you can be
Yes.
if you want that title.
Yes. Your favorite Gen X expert.
Yeah, if
There's
you
too many
tell
X's in that.
people
Yeah.
if you tell people enough that you are the favorite, then you become the favorite.
Yes. I'm well aware of that principle. Yes.
Well, it is great to see you. We missed you at Transform. We were there last week, back in Vegas, and we went live with the HR morning show, which was a blast. We had Serge, the weatherman, there. We had a bunch of guests. It was really awesome. So you were missed. Hopefully we'll
Thank
get to
you.
do that in the future in
I
person.
hope so. I was watching from afar, very jealous not to be part of it.
Yeah.
It's the two years now in a row I've had to miss Transform. I won't miss it next year.
All right. Well, I'm going to take your word for it, but I will say I saw a lot more young faces than I did last year, which to me was very encouraging. I think that it was likely, a lot of salespeople, a lot of marketers who entered the ring of Transform and brought that young vibe. But I was really happy to see that I wasn't the only Gen Zer. Had some fellow thought leaders in the space as well, so that was really fun to get to hang out with them. And to be honest, can I be honest? This is a safe space.
Yeah.
Didn't really learn that much from Transform. I feel like the content felt recycled, and like it just kept sounding the same to me. Maybe that's because I'm coming up on 5 years in the industry, which isn't even that long of a time, but just kind of felt like a lot of the conversations I'd heard before. I did attend, well, obviously my own panel, which was about Gen Z in the workplace, which I thought was probably one of the more interesting ones. I heard there was one the first day that I need to listen into, and then there was Annie Dean, who is a amazing expert and thought leader in the future of work. She did a presentation and it was really underattended, in my opinion. It was kind of a bad time slot. But hearing her speak for the first time in person, and then I actually fangirled her and got a photo with her, which was awesome. But outside of that, I feel like the actual tracks and sessions weren't all that great.
Yeah, I think with a lot of the big expos, I think one of the problems is that a lot of the conversations kind of get recycled. A lot of the vendors you get there, and this isn't being negative about these events, because obviously I live my life at a lot of these events as you do now
Yeah.
as well. I'm not being negative. It's just that a lot of the conversations boil down to a small number of key talking points and key iterations in the tech and things. And I think it's the same kind of people having the same kind of conversations. And most of the fun happens at all the breakout sessions and all the evening sessions that get sponsored by
Yeah.
vendors. And so it's sometimes it's not easy to unless somebody is releasing brand new research. So with where you get the much smaller events where the vendors themselves are hosting a small conference, then they'll be releasing new research and stuff. So that gets, I suppose, a bit more interesting. Whereas at the bigger events like, well, we'll say Transform, because that's one you've just been to. I won't name any others. You get more of a general, I suppose,
Yeah.
overview of what the vendors are talking about, what the new iterations are, what the new additions are over the coming 6 to 12 months. And a lot of it is around, the same kind of thing: how we hire people, how we attract them, how we retain them,
Yeah.
how we motivate them. And obviously, unfortunately, any event you're at, and I was at one in the UK last week, the letters A and I are never more than about 2 minutes away.
Yeah, that's definitely that was definitely the case. And I heard, some fodder from folks about, the kind of disappointment when it came to covering like DEI and addressing the big elephant in the room, and actually talking about the implications of that. I think that was kind of a miss on their part. It might have happened outside of the conference, but I personally attended, like Torrin Ellis had a dinner that he invited me to, and we didn't really like talk about it directly, which I thought, we probably could have as a group, but I look forward to maybe having some of those conversations behind closed doors with certain people. The other thing I was thinking about is like the more Gen Z, I would say, conferences that I've been to. They're so much more interactive. There's so much more, Q&A. There's a lot more time carved out for people to like talk and network and build relationships and also create content. And I was really surprised by how few, companies or brands were actually creating content with influencers or just creating content at all. I think it's a huge miss. I've talked about this before on LinkedIn. And I also found it a little, just strange that there were, not many companies doing interesting things generally in the expo. I found the innovation stage at the expo to be the best one personally. Adam Posner, he did a little conversation with, I think it was the VP of people at Greenhouse and Okta, and that was really incredible, the innovation stage. But anyway, enough of my transform recap. I think it was good to get some thoughts out.
Yeah.
But today we're talking about a trend that has come up that I've been asked about before, and that trend is micro retirement. So, this is a new trend that's been rising amongst specifically younger cohorts like Gen Z. And actually, it's something that I have toyed with a little bit. Back in 2023, I got laid off from a job, and I actually took like 3 months to just kind of travel and do me and like be, kind of just work on myself and focus on traveling and yoga and just figuring out what I wanted to do next and my next steps. And I ultimately landed on, well, let me see how this solopreneur thing could go, and went in that direction. But I think those few months were really crucial for my, development in the next phase of my life. But I could say more about it, but I'm curious, Mervyn, if you've heard of this. I know that you've written about it, obviously. So yeah, any like initial thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's obviously an interesting idea. It's an idea that, had we been having this conversation 10 years ago, it wouldn't have even been anywhere near the agenda. Having said that, if I go back, the early parts of my career, for example, there was always, if you had a job with an organization and you left it, and if you were going to remain in the same field, maybe work for a competitor or somebody else in the same field, you always had a gap of, it could be up to 3 months, it sometimes was 6 months, where you couldn't work for a competitor, if you like, or
Mm.
another company that operated in the same field. So that was mandated, and that was part of your contract, and you would get sued if you broke it. And so that kind of, I suppose, approach of when you leave one job and there's a gap before you start another one has always been around. But I think what my research and the conversations I've had with this concept of micro retirements is more, not so much, okay, I've finished with company A, company B, I want to join, they'll pay me more, they're a direct competitor, but I've got to go and like surf the waves for 6 months because I might take current knowledge with me to the next company.
Mm.
I think it's changed now, as opposed to, and possibly, well, I say possibly Gen Z, but older people remain in the workplace, and they can work for somebody for a year and take 3-4 months off and then go and work for someone else. So I think it is this kind of breaking, and I don't. It'd be interesting to know if you think that post COVID. I know it's the for the UK. It's we're speaking on the day when it's the fifth anniversary of the first lockdown. I don't know if that has kind of led to this kind of thinking about, you know what, I can't work flat out. I need to take breaks between projects. Need to take breaks between assignments and jobs. Whether that's something that's really risen over the last 4 or 5 years, or whether it's something that's always been a trend and it's just kind of gained momentum.
I think, when I reflect back on COVID and that time, I think that a huge shift, I would say, in terms of the general hiring landscape was that it became a lot more normal to take time off between jobs, or just have gaps in your resume, like, you were taking care of your family, or you got laid off, or there was some sort of break in working. I think it became much more common. And so there's a little bit less, harsh judgment, I would say, over the last 5 years as a result, in terms of looking at someone's resume and being like, well, they're not working, or, and therefore I'm not going to hire them. I I don't think that it's changed so much that like a mother would take time off after having kids for a few years and not feel like, the challenge of breaking back into work, after that. But I would say if you take a few years off, or even, months off, to like focus on your personal brand, it's likely that you could get back into working full time. And I'm actually seeing a rise in terms of content creators and solopreneurs like myself going back into full time roles because they, want that consistency. They want the opportunity to learn from a team again. I think it's, being a creator full time is a lot less glamorous than it might seem from the outset. And I think that, a lot of people are sort of sold on this idea of like, oh, it's going to be amazing. And then it turns out it's like, well, it's actually a lot harder than you think. So I think that there's definitely a trend that I'm seeing in terms of people going back into working for full time, in full time roles. But yeah, I would say that it's a lot less taboo to take time off.
I think that's a general thing. I mean, I think that again, giving you the X viewpoint, um, the people didn't really take time off. If they did, it was probably a holiday that they'd already scheduled to take off between ending one job and starting the next one.
Mhm.
As I said, we sometimes contractually couldn't work for a competitor for a month or 3 months or 6 months. People used to find ways around that, of course. But I think the concept of, I've worked on some interesting projects here. I think I need a bit of a break, recharge batteries, maybe learn, maybe play around with a few new ideas and get ready for my next big project. I think that is something that's risen more with your generation. I think that
Yeah.
so X and certainly boomers, and probably older Gen Y, any gaps, in a CV. I mean, I was in recruitment for many years, and
Right.
anybody you saw that was taking 3, 4, 5 month gaps between jobs, and it was kind of, I was just relaxing. I was learning some new stuff. I was taking, some time to build up my knowledge in something else. That would have been a red flag to most hiring companies, and certainly to most
Mm,
recruiters. There needed to be this consistent kind of thing. So I think that it probably is something which has come about because Gen Z see career building in a different way. And in fact, some of that is because you have a different viewpoint on the world, and others is because the way businesses are structured and companies are structured, you're pushed into that. Of kind of not having permanent jobs for 10, 15 years with one organization kind of thing, as we've discussed on previous. So I think that the concept of micro retirements is actually, personally to me, not a great expression, because it's like, I've been working for 6, 9 months. Now I'm going to go off and do absolutely nothing for 6 months. And then I'll look for a bit of work again. And that's kind of, I don't think what the concept is. I think it's taking time out to maybe, yeah, part is recharge batteries, but also to learn stuff and get ready for maybe a
Yeah.
new challenge or a new thing. And I think that by calling it micro retirements, it plays into a belief from the older generations that Gen Z are playing around with work, and it's not really, you're not committed to kind of, working
Yeah.
hard and all of that. So I think it's a shame that it's framed like that. And it might be that because it's framed like that, it gets lots of clicks and hits and stuff, and gets lots of people angry, and then lots of people defending it and
Yeah.
stuff, and which is what the magazines want, obviously, or the magazine, the digital news sites want.
Right. Because I imagine you read that word retirement and you're like, oh, well, that's reserved for older people who have been working for decades and not
Yes.
for the people who just entered the workforce and who are, not even 30. Um, I will, I think you pose an important point there of why this framing isn't the best. I
Mm.
think I have actually I've spoken to several people who have taken sabbaticals from work, so I think that's more of a I think it's a more kosher way of talking about it, but I will say like it's usually for a personal reason, it's like they're going through some sort of mental health crisis or a family matter. Someone very close to me a few years ago took medical leave for like 6 months to a year. So I think it just depends. It could be for medical reasons. It could also be to learn a skill. I think especially now as technology is just moving at such a rapid rate, I wouldn't be surprised if, people are taking time off between jobs if they got laid off to just focus on AI and skill building and learning how to do AI automation and selling that as a service. Maybe as a side business, maybe as a full-time thing. Because I don't know, I think I was reading about, I think it was Mark, what's his name, from Shark Tank? Mark Cuban. Mark
Right.
Cuban was in an interview and I think he was on a stage and he was like asked, what would you do if you were graduating now and like you had time on your hands? He was like, I would literally spend all day, every day learning about AI and just like focus, like learning new tools and just keeping up with the space. And then I look at I mean, I just spoke to one of my friends who owns an agency, and she's like, yeah, we do personal branding for authors and, entrepreneurs and CEOs, but we actually don't automate the conversions to like, their newsletter or their email lists and whatnot. And I'm like, why? Like, that's like a big business opportunity right there to like automate all of that for them so they don't have to do it. And like that was just one example of the opportunity, but I see those types of opportunities when it comes to AI automation every single day. Um,
Mm.
so anyway, I went down a rabbit hole, but I say that all to say,
Yeah.
micro retirement could be, or a sabbatical could be for so many different reasons. And I think you kind of have to weigh like, what's the upside, what's the downside before you go out and decide to do this type of thing. Which, by the way, I'm curious if you have the numbers. I have some like a very big range, but essentially, what are the numbers on how many organizations actually offer sabbaticals?
I don't know.
You don't know.
I've not done my homework. You should have given
Yeah.
me this as some homework to research.
Well,
Um,
yesterday I posted about this article, or I guess it was a LinkedIn news story, and I found that it was like anywhere between like 8 and like 16% maybe of companies offering sabbaticals. But then in the UK, there was a study done like maybe last year or the year before that found 53% of companies in the UK offer sabbaticals. So I'm curious, like that's a big difference. Is that more common in
uh,
the
it,
UK?
it could be, yes. I mean, I'm aware, kind of historically, of people who've maybe worked for an organisation for a long time being able to take time off for whatever personal reasons, travel, something, to learn a new skill or something, and then come back to the organisation. So those kind
Mhm.
of things have happened in the past. Um, but I think it's kind of it was probably framed a bit differently. And I think that is part of the problem. It's how it's framed.
Right.
Because retirement, the word retirement means you don't do anything anymore. It's kind of, you sit back, you relax, and in fact, one of the problems that obviously Gen Z have in the workplace is that boomers and Gen X just won't retire.
Right.
They get to a certain stage, they retire, and before you know it, they're back in the workplace again doing some project work or something,
Yeah.
because they're
Fractionally.
living longer, and in fact, there was a big article in The Economist about this, about kind of people not retiring, and that's kind of the impact on the overall workforce.
Right.
That's because people are living longer, they're active for longer, but also I think what my generation, if you like. I go back to the point that we kind of, it was expected, if there was something new like AI, the company or your employer would be, the onus was on them to upskill you in that. It wasn't for you to go and upskill yourself in it. Whereas now, I mean, I can think of somebody I know a good few years ago, when video went to digital.
Yeah.
And he was kind of freelancer, but he was trying to find work where people would actually train him on digital. But of course, it wasn't, because he wasn't permanently employed. It was no, it's up to you to get those skills, and then we can give you a project. And that, I think, at the time, I heard that from a few different kind of people. That seemed very strange, because I think we were used to growing up with you would always be upskilled by the organization you were with, because it was in their interest that you were on top of everything. Of course, we didn't have the kind of scale of technology we have now, where there is something new happening literally every other day. And so I think that, again, I think it is more important now, but the concept of taking time off between roles or projects or assignments to learn more and brand that as a kind of micro retirement. I think kind of learning spaces or something might make it sound a bit more positive,
Right.
as opposed to kind of micro retirements, which does, like, okay, well, I've done 9 months work, I'm just going to sit back and put my feet up and kind of chill out in the sun for a few months.
Right.
That's what it sounds like to certainly a boomer and a Gen X.
Right. Well, when did that shift, that whole, organizations upskilling their people versus people upskilling themselves?
Digitization. It's kind of it. I mean, a lot of that coincided, without getting political and economic, a lot of that coincided with a big recession here in the late 80s, early 90s. So a lot of jobs went, and when new things, when new roles came, they were much more kind of digital. I think I said on a previous episode that the kind of, when I was at school, we were learning about computers, very basic stuff, nothing like now. But it was always, the belief was, at some stage there would be, we would all have computers to work with, because that's the way it was going. I don't know, I apologize if it wasn't on one of our previous ones, but I know on a podcast or recently, I've talked about kind of, when I was a trainee accountant, and one of the more senior managers said to me that he keeps hearing that one day all of the tax and accounts will be done on a computer.
Right.
And he actually said to me, he said, I hope I'm dead before then. I can't think of anything worse. And I think about that man a lot.
That's
The
intense.
last 10, 15 years. But this was the belief. There was no trust of computers or anything when I was kind of starting out in the world of work. Whereas, for someone like you and Gen Z, computers is it. Digitization, technology is everything.
Yeah. The last part of this article that I did want to get to also before we're out of time was about the practical implications for organizations. So at the bottom of this article, it basically goes through what the applications of, micro retirement, let's call it a sabbatical, actually are. Or, the ways that you could kind of integrate this mentality. And I wanted to shout out one of them, definitely, but the list was develop flexible time off policies, which is makes sense. I mean, the 4-day work week has kind of blown up in the EU and maybe also the UK. I know that that's a big thing. And then second one, encourage skill building and personal growth. We talked about that. Third one, fostering a culture of work-life balance, obviously. But then the fourth one was leveraging micro retirement or sabbatical as a retention tool. So this was interesting because for me, with just as I entered the workforce, I remember thinking the ideal situation for working for me, like within a year, right? Because every company is different, would be to work all year and to have maybe like a summer or like a few months of the summer, 1 month of the summer off. And this is something that Europe does, right? They take like all of July or August or sometimes both months off. And what's interesting to me is like this question of we're gaining all this time back with AI and we're able to do things so much more seamlessly and it will only continue, right? So at what point do we step back and talk about what we're actually doing with that time versus just doing more work? And I think
I,
one of the things could be, do we just put the business on autopilot for like a month of the summer and give people time off like they probably deserve?
yeah. I'd like to see what business leaders of huge organisations have to say about that. But no, it I think yes. I mean, I agree to a certain extent. With a lot of what you say. I know it's from X to Z. We're supposed to be disagreeing on most things, but yeah, I can agree with that. I mean, the perspective has, I suppose, I mentioned earlier that if you change companies, when I was kind of at your career stage, you would always have at least a month, if not 2 months, between them because you had to have this cut off
Right.
in case you took live
Which
information with
still
you.
exists in some industries, like
Yeah.
in finance.
Yes. So they weren't seen as micro retirements, but some countries they do. I won't start naming European countries. There's some where kind of people pretty much disappear for the month of August um, and don't work very much. So I think that it's overall it's looking at work more flexibly, but looking at not so much work more flexibly, it's our relationship with work more flexibly, how we do it, when we do it, how we're able to do it. And this need to upskill and learn new developments, because AI will iterate again and again and again. So yeah, there will always be something new to learn. Whether or not this is technically part of your job, whether it is the responsibility of the company that if you're employed that employs you to teach you that, whether it's your responsibility, certainly if you're a freelancer or independent, it's your responsibility to learn it. And I think that the big difference generationally is that Gen Z, expect to learn it themselves, to upskill themselves, whereas certainly Gen X boomers expect somebody to teach them, if you like.
Mhm.
And I think that's, I suppose, the big difference. And the use of the expression micro retirement, I don't know who first used that, and I don't know if that's used in a way to have almost like a little pop at Gen Z, like it's kind of like chilling out, retiring out of the workforce for a few months to learn something. I don't know if there's supposed to be that thing about it, or it's a kind of a good way to explain. You know what, we are now in a position, and again, we've had a previous episode we talked about finances and kind of how the finances have changed between generations, and
Yeah.
therefore the relationship with work has changed as well. And I don't know if kind of this is a way to kind of almost like a payoff, to have these breaks where you can do pretty much what you want, learn it to use new skills, to maybe practice ways to make yourself better at what you do, to just go and chill and recharge batteries. So I kind of mini breaks, I suppose, being British, I prefer as opposed to micro retirements. But but it's because of the thing that retirement is something you used to not come back from. Although nowadays, many people retire and
Yeah,
three
I think
weeks later they're
we're
working again.
changing. We're literally changing the definition of retirement, and it's
Yeah.
happening on this show. So you heard it here first. We're calling micro
Yes.
retirement mini breaks from your career, and hey, why not upskill? Well, thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. This has been X to Z, and we will see you next Wednesday.